Welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to slow things right down. Let's gently unpack a really profound story, the parable of Elias. Now, Elias was a man who literally possessed all the answers in the world, a legendary scholar, and yet he failed a test that absolutely no book, no scroll, and no amount of late-night studying could ever prepare him for. It's this beautiful, fragile story about exactly where the mind meets the heart. Let's dive in. But before we step fully into his world, I want you to just sit with a question for a second. What is the true measure of wisdom? I mean, really, how do we even quantify that? Is it just racking up facts, the ability to debate super complex theories? Well, Elias believed he had already solved this riddle. For him, wisdom was entirely an intellectual pursuit, built on pure logic and certainty. But, as we're going to see, the universe has a pretty unexpected way of challenging our most rigid beliefs. So, Elias lived a life of stark contrasts. On one hand, you had his relentless pursuit of knowledge. We're talking burying himself in dusty scrolls, mastering ancient philosophy, basically shutting out the noise of the whole world just to understand the quiet mechanics of the universe. But on the flip side of that lay the actual, messy experience of living. People laughing in crowded marketplaces, the warmth of shared family dinners, those simple, unspoken human connections. Now, he had achieved absolute intellectual mastery, for sure, but it came at the really heavy cost of profound human isolation. Secretly, he loved the admiration he got from kings and scholars, but he lived entirely up in his head, completely disconnected from the actual heartbeat of the world.
And here's the wild part. Despite answering the most complex questions imaginable about life, death, truth, the whole universe, despite kings literally traveling from distant lands just to hear him speak in the great halls, people noticed one deeply unsettling detail about Master Elias. The number of times he smiled was exactly 0. Not once. He could easily quote scholars from centuries ago on the precise philosophical meaning of happiness, right? But his own face never showed a single trace of it.
Well, his entire paradigm shattered one rainy evening. He's walking through this dim, crowded marketplace, his mind probably swelling with pride after delivering some highly praised lecture, and suddenly, a little child bumps into him. Now, she carried no books, she had no grand titles, no scholarly knowledge, just a simple woven basket of flowers, and she just looked right up at this great, serious philosopher through the light rain and smiled. Just a pure, warm, totally effortless smile.
Elias felt immediately uncomfortable. He just wasn't used to this kind of unstructured, genuine human warmth. So he quickly looked away, pulling his heavy cloak tighter. But the little girl kind of tilted her head curiously, and she asked, "Why do your eyes look so sad?" Imagine the absolute shock of that moment. No student, no king, no brilliant academic peer had ever dared to pierce through his pride with a question that was so deeply observant. It was piercingly personal.
Naturally, Elias froze. And in that rare, sudden moment of vulnerability, his ego just instinctively took over. He gave her this cold, defensive reply. "I am not sad." He was basically throwing up his intellectual armor, building a wall of stoicism instead of just engaging with their shared humanity. He shut down that fragile little connection entirely just to preserve his image as the untouchable master.
But then, with just a single effortless observation, this child delivered a truth far more profound than any of his ancient scrolls. She just said, "But happy people usually smile back." And with that, she giggled, turned, and ran off into the rain, leaving the great Master Elias standing right there in the damp chill. And those simple words just echoed endlessly in his mind all night long, because it wasn't some complex philosophical debate, It was a basic, undeniable human truth that he had completely blinded himself to.
Later that night, sitting all alone in his massive, silent library, just surrounded by flickering candlelight and thousands of books, Elias experienced something truly agonizing. The total, crushing collapse of his intellectual pride. It hit him that he had spent his entire lifetime understanding complex ideas and intricate theories, but he had completely failed to understand people. For the very first time in years, sitting there among his thousands of documented answers, the great scholar felt devastatingly empty.
He was finally forced to confront the true, terrifying limits of his own intellect. He realized that, sure, he could brilliantly explain the abstract concept of joy to a rapt audience, but he couldn't actually feel it blooming in his own chest. He could perfectly define love using the oldest texts in the world, but he couldn't express even the most basic warmth to a passing child. His knowledge was just this theoretical skeleton. It was completely missing a heartbeat. He had mastered philosophy, but, quite simply, he had forgotten how to be human.
It's actually profound to think about how this internal transformation unfolded inside him. Think about it. He spent decades building these rigid academic walls, fortifying his mind against the unpredictability of the real world. Yet it only took seconds, literally just the span of an unanswered smile from a kid, to completely crack that foundation. And that tiny fracture led to agonizing hours sitting in an empty library, facing his own hollow pride, which finally brought him to the pale light of the very next morning, and a genuinely brave decision. Because a heart closed by pride, he finally realized, can never experience real wisdom.
So the next morning, Elias didn't retreat into his books to hide from his discomfort. He took action. First, he stepped right out of his sanctuary and headed straight back to that rain-soaked, crowded marketplace. He searched through this chaotic sea of faces until he finally found her, the little girl selling flowers. And when she looked up and smiled at him again, slowly, maybe a little awkwardly, but so genuinely, Elias smiled back.
As he finally returned that smile, tears of pure relief quietly filled his eyes. And these weren't tears of sadness, but of a profound, overwhelming unburdening. He finally felt it, true connection, genuine warmth, shared humanity. In that single, quiet moment amidst the bustling market, the great philosopher felt something that absolutely no ancient scroll could ever teach him: the simple, undeniable joy of being emotionally alive.
There's such an essential reminder in Elias's journey here, for anyone who might find themselves chasing intelligence at the expense of kindness. It's this: knowledge may sharpen the mind, but only humility opens the heart. Elias literally had the sharpest mind in the entire kingdom, but his heart had been locked tight by his own ego and pride. It took the pure humility of a child with 0 titles to finally unlock it.
Ultimately, the smartest mind in the world still desperately needs a human heart. Because true wisdom, it isn't measured by how much data you can retain, or how many facts you can recite, or how elegantly you can argue a point. It's measured by how deeply you can love, how you feel, and how you connect with another soul. Sometimes a child's small smile can teach us way more about the reality of life than 1,000 heavy books ever could.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want you to take a quiet moment to ask yourself something. Are you chasing intelligence, success, or mastery while maybe forgetting the simple beauty of being emotionally alive? Are you balancing your intellect with empathy? Or is there a smile you've forgotten to return? Thank you so much for taking this gentle journey with me today. Take some time to reflect on that, and I'll see you in the next explainer.